Welcome today. This is another collaboration between Alchemizing Energy and the Our Roots podcast with Joseph Baba Ifa. Today we are discussing the role of the women and the female in Ifa. So today I just would like to welcome Baba Ifa.
Jen, it's a pleasure to be sitting with you again. Thank you so much for the opportunity. We loved the questions so much last time, and I remember when you came with this idea, I was very excited about it because I think within Ifa, it's very easy to get caught up in, babalawo this, oriate that, and it's very important to analyze the role of the sisters within Ifa and how empowering it is on both sides. So thank you.
Well, I wanted to say first, Abaru Abuye Aboshishe to you,
Thank
Baba.
you. Obrigado.
But if you don't mind, we'll just get right into it.
Sure.
So, what are the roles of the women in Ifa? What are their importance?
Well, the Odu 𝗃𝗍𝗃𝗃 or Baraika states that the woman within Ifa or within the world is the most valuable thing that we have, right? And I think that's really important to state because, you know, we kind of get caught up in, our children, right? And our children are, the most important thing to us. But when it comes to the sustenance of the human race, it really is the woman because ultimately the children are the product, but women are the vehicle. They are the fundamental aspect of procreation. And Orumila posed this question to all of his babalawos, and he said, who is the most important creature or organism on Earth? And of course, their first response was men, right? Which he said is completely wrong. We're probably the least important. But that's really not bad considering it's pretty much three components. Then they said children. They said children are blessed and they deserve all of our attention, love, and sacrifice. But as far as the propagation of our race and the sustenance of it, it's women. So from the very beginning, Orumila identified that, the importance of the woman cannot be overstated. So first and foremost, their role is that of divinity. Ifa was actually the first sacred feminine spirituality, and it was the first spirituality period. And they quickly realized that women are literally gods on earth, and that leads to a bunch of other interpretations as to why women don't go through certain processes that men go through, right? Such as, at least within our criteria, Yang Ifa and whatnot within the Lukumi stance. And even possibly a misinterpretation of the role of a Yang Ifa within 𝘃𝗶𝗱𝗏 as well. So when we talk about roles, procreation is obviously huge and the most key, being that they're the only ones who are able to do it. But when we get into the spiritual role, we have to start with the position of 𝗃𝗶𝗸𝗏, right? There's a pataki in the Odu of 𝗃𝗏𝗏 or 𝗃𝗏𝗏𝗃𝗏, where Orumila was a traveling man. He was somebody that would move around a lot for work and whatnot. The Babalawo has always had this characteristic. We go where we're needed. And you can see themes of this even reiterated in fraternities like Freemasonry, etc., the traveling concept. We have to go through a pilgrimage to be able to learn, or even if you look at when Jesus disappeared in the Bible for a good, 25 years, he was going through his pilgrimage where he was learning different disciplines and things like that. An example amongst all prophets. And when he was given the opportunity of a lifetime to go to the city of Ife and become the Oluo or the head Ifa priest, he quickly accepted it, right? But Orumila was a little bit scattered, based on him always working and things like that. He wasn't always able to necessarily prepare. So he just headed out because, he didn't want to keep anybody waiting. And along the way, a horrible storm happened, and he had to seek refuge in a barn, it says. There was a feminine voice that came from behind the door and saw him drenched in water, and he came knocking, and she let him in, right? But it was pitch black and darkness, so all they had was conversation. And, they started discussing things, and Orumila, expressed to her he had been given this opportunity. He sincerely appreciated, the hospitality she was providing. And, as two grown adults, in a dark space, alone, they ended up, having some consensual activity. And, Rumila quickly fell in love with the woman, even though he had never seen her. So, having some pillow talk, he told her that, he would come back for her, and once he established himself, he would, make things right, and they'd get married, and all these beautiful, concepts and promises. So the next morning, he left before the sun came up, which is kind of his routine, 4 a.m., and he headed out to Ife once more. He was received well for his punctuality, and he immediately began working. The king, all of these different chiefs and things like that wanted divination, wanted a bowl, wanted all these different services, and before you know it, he didn't even have time to breathe. So Rula quickly, due to his work, forgot about the obligations he had to this woman. So one day, a woman shows up, a leper, in the town square with a young daughter. And she basically says at the top of her lungs, I'm 𝗀𝗲𝗍𝗲's baby mother, and this is his daughter, right? And, this was very scandalous because 𝗀𝗲𝗍𝗲, they said, went 7 years without returning to see what happened to her because he forgot. And, quickly he was called upon to, be accountable. And, he wanted to know if this woman was telling the truth. And she said, I'm the woman from the barn. And he immediately remembered, and he was very apologetic, but he was also taken aback because she was a leper. And, he said, well, let's do divination, and let's do the marital rites. So you can, have that position officially, and, I can give my name to my daughter. And when they did divination for the woman, the 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗲 was revealed, and her initiation name was 𝗵𝗶𝗸𝗲, which literally means she who I cured from leprosy, right? And through the ceremonies and medicines that were administered, she was able to cure herself, right? And her daughter as well was initiated. And, one was obviously his wife, and his daughter became the spiritual wife of his Ifa icon, where with time, in maturity, his daughter married a Babalawo within Ife as well. And it basically worked out as a happy ending, even though it was a little rocky while they were trying to get established. But it is because of the Odu of 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗲 that the female role within Ifa is known as 𝗵𝗶𝗸𝗲. And a lot of people look at it as servitude, but when we really analyze it, it is that of facilitator, nurturer. It is reflective of the feminine position within nature, ideally. We look at the characteristic of women being that they are divine. You guys are the creators, right? Through procreation, the stability of the home, it can't be overstated. And you look at men, we are the destroyers of nature due to our musculature and our strength and whatnot. We're put to do more laborious things, based on ethics as well. I mean, I wouldn't feel comfortable with my wife chopping down a tree if I'm not doing anything at all. And that kind of reiterates as to why we're the ones who perform sacrifice within all traditions, especially an Afro-descendant standpoint. It's completely taboo for a woman to sacrifice for the same reason, to maintain her divinity. And there's odus that explain that as well. So it really goes back to that nature of the woman is meant to facilitate and nurture. And that is kind of the role when we talk about the Yang Ifa concept as well, where there have been some new interpretations and adaptations now on both sides, possibly. But, we look at the role of 𝗵𝗶𝗸𝗲, when a woman receives hand of Ifa within the Afro-Cuban Lukumi context, that is her title. And she is the spiritual wife of 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗲. They enter into a covenant to a certain degree with their icon, and that's born in the Odu of 𝗃𝗲𝗍𝗍. In Spanish, it's known as las vestales, which are basically these women who would attend to 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗲, who was at an advanced age, and they would bathe him and all these different things, but they would never, fornicate with him. It was completely, platonic, spiritual. And that's the same role with the 𝗵𝗶𝗸𝗲 and their godfathers Ifa, or Ifa in general, where the woman attends to 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗲 in a very ceremonial fashion that's taught after receiving Ifa. Apart from that, they are the ones who process the sacred meat that is sacrificed via the hands of the Babalawo in the hand of Ifa, to ensure that it is clean, to ensure that it is not contaminated spiritually or otherwise. They are the ones who serve the table, because in the Odu of 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗲, 𝘃𝗶𝗱𝗲, and 𝗃𝗏𝗏𝗄 was where they tried to poison 𝗃𝗏𝗏𝗲's fish, and his wife, who was serving the table, and the brothers, who were treacherous, was able to spot it and stop him from basically dying. So that's why, if you notice, there is ideally, or should be, one 𝗵𝗶𝗸𝗲 that actually runs the table, and there might be other sisters there helping her and whatnot, because it might be a big table. These guys eat a lot, we eat a lot. So all of those different roles, apart from learning everything about her odu and everything that basically applies to her responsibilities with the other orishas she may have received at that point, where someone with just hand of Ifa can also serve a table of bawalawos apart from a hand of Ifa in an Ifa consecration where we're initiating another bawalawo. You don't have to be 𝗹𝗶𝗸𝗶𝗍 Ifa to do that, where I've heard that concept as well, which is a little erroneous. But there's that role, right? And then there's another step, possibly that someone may be able to achieve if their, I don't know, family member becomes a babalawo or their husband, etc., which is known as the 𝗹𝗶𝗸𝗶𝗍, which is basically our expression of a yang Ifa, without all the convolution as far as responsibilities that they share with babalawos modernly. But the word ayafa literally means Aya, wife, Fa of Ifa, right? 𝗹𝗶𝗸𝗶𝗍 Ifa means the wife of Ifa, ultimately. And it's a very complex process that happens during the 𝗃𝗀𝗃, as it's known. And basically, it provides them more tools and more benefits, being that they're now entering into an even more serious covenant with Orunmila. And they have the same roles, but even more so because they're able to manually attend to the Babalawo's Ifa. Even though it's not theirs, they attend to that gentleman's Ifa and assist them in anything that they're able to. For example, if there's a plante or a mano orula, she's there. If we need to facilitate any conditions for that gentleman to study or function, she's there, which is basically what the wives do now. They facilitate so much apart from all the independent things. Like, please don't misinterpret me. This is just auxiliary. I mean, there's a lot of high-powered women that still serve the table. I have goddaughters that are doctors, lawyers, very high-octane, ladies that, aren't frustrated at all at the idea of fulfilling this function because they're able to recognize it's exclusive and prestigious, even though seemingly it seems like servitude. They're really ensuring the safety of a whole ceremony. That woman has the utmost confidence of all the brothers there that she's going to protect us. And, as men, that's really all we look for, whether it's our mothers, beginning with our mothers and our grandmothers, or the protection and solidarity that our wives provide us, and then ultimately our daughters to a certain degree before they start lives of their own.
So here's the question. When it comes down to a 𝗵𝗶 in Babalawo's wife, you did touch on any relationship with that 𝗵𝗶. So if a wife, how does a 𝗵𝗶 chosen for a specific Babalawo? And if that 𝗵𝗶, if it comes out in the reading that that person is supposed to be that Babalawo's 𝗵𝗶, say over time they begin to have feelings for each other, or maybe the Babalawo's attracted to her. So is there supposed to be a platonic relationship that does not cross that line 100%? Or how does that work? Because I see a lot of times you might have a Babalawo with, you know, sometimes it could be abused, I would say. You know what I'm saying? Like where, that 𝗵𝗶, I've seen situations where that title has gotten abused.
Absolutely. And, unfortunately, there's brothers that really don't know how to handle their position, that don't understand the sanctity of what we're doing here. Within the Afro-Cuban Lukumi tradition, that is completely taboo. Any woman that arrives to you to receive hand of Ifa, it's because she was predestined to receive hand of Ifa. So, an aspect of ourselves from a masculine standpoint has to die to be able to attend to that woman appropriately. If she arrived at your home looking for Orunmila, you cannot deny her for any reason whatsoever. And you have to understand that she is to basically die as a, human woman, a worldly woman, and become your daughter, right? So it would be incestuous and completely taboo and sacrilegious. From an 𝘃𝗺𝗃 standpoint, and I'll explain why the Lukumi has that concept and where that really comes from. From an 𝘃𝗺𝗃 standpoint, they have another viewpoint where, babalawos give 𝗃𝗀𝗃 or Orunmila to their wives all the time because it's part of their marriage process, right? So they look at it from a much more worldly, romantic standpoint, kind of like 𝗃𝗶𝗸𝗲 says, and that Odu Orunmila did initiate his wife. But the issue is within the Afro-Cuban Lukumi tradition, there is a ceremony that happens during the hand of Ifa, 𝗃𝗀𝗃, where the woman is killed, as a worldly woman and is born again. as a spiritual daughter to that man and his Ifa icon. And all of this can be found in the Odu of 𝗃𝗍𝗃 or 𝗃𝗍𝗃, where a woman came for initiation with Orumila. He initiated her, as was our custom, and she became infatuated with him, and she kind of misunderstood the feelings she was having for him as attraction, and she pursued him. Orumila resisted. He was told by Ifa not to, allow himself to be seduced, but his flesh was weak, and he started a relationship with her. He did not realize, once again, that she was a leper, right? At least it was beginning, or what have you. And they both got sick and they died. It is interesting, the metaphor for the leprosy, because if you look in antiquity, leprosy was seen as an abomination. It was abhorred, it was something that, you stayed away from. So I think that's why the literature utilizes that symbolism for this act or position, because it is completely taboo. So it really depends on your tradition. Nobody's wrong. I've met many 𝘃𝗍𝗃𝗍 brothers that, they've done this with their wives and things like that perfectly fine. What cannot occur is we cannot use Ifa as a dating app, right? We don't become 𝗃𝗍𝗃𝗍 to just, fish for those kind of things. So I think that's really important, and that has to come with the pedigree process. When we're bringing a brother in, we make it very clear, we respect our wives, we honor our wives, we're loyal to them, no infidelity whatsoever, and apart from that, we respect the women that arrive in our home in a spiritual context, to not go through the embarrassment that Orumila did in 𝗃𝗍𝗃𝗃.
So let's talk about Odu in Ifa.
Mm-hmm.
One of the biggest things that has come up is that Iya Nifa are not supposed to see Odu. So I was wondering, sorry, I was wondering, like, what is why why is that? I mean, if you can, I know there's probably a certain amount of things you cannot really get into, but I know for the most part, whatever you can talk about when it comes down to Odu, that process, and at some part in the ceremony, the woman is, when you're at Ifa, there's like a certain aspects of the ceremony that a woman's not supposed to do. Um, and the main thing is, I know that Odu is considered a womb. So I was just wondering, what is the why can't a female see Odu?
Yes, ma'am. So we really have to base ourselves off of the Odu's 𝗃𝗍𝗃𝗍 and 𝗹𝗶𝗸𝗶𝗍 or 𝗹𝗶𝗸𝗃𝗍. And I also want to put a disclaimer that this verse, or Esefa from 𝗃𝗍𝗃, or 𝗃𝗍𝗃𝗃, is completely 𝘃𝗍 in nature. It was actually given to us by our brothers across the sea. And what occurred is Orumila had 15 wives. And, they would satisfy him in all ways, right? Whether it was, adult time, whether it was food, whether it was the stabilization of his home. They raised his children. He had daughters with them, ironically. And he was desperately, in desire of a son. Maybe for social reasons, emotionally, what have you. Maybe he wanted to be able to create that relationship with a young man that he created. So he was looking for another wife apart from that goal, to also stimulate him spiritually, because none of his other wives really motivated him towards becoming a better 𝗃𝗍𝗃𝗃. So, the word got out that Orumila was on the market for his 16th and final wife, and Olodumare heard this and invited him to the palace to be able to speak. And he told Orumila that he should consider dating or courting his daughter Odu. And Orumila told Olodumare, he said, look, my wives are beautiful. I'm very blessed. They're good women. But, I'm not just here for a good time. I need this woman to stimulate me spiritually. It's the most attended part of myself. My whole identity is Ifa, and none of my wives really support me in that. And he said, I think you're going to be pleasantly surprised, because she comes from a spiritual home, and I think you should give her a shot. So he took her on a date, and they started going through the garden, or the Igbo, as it's known. The first part of Ibodu literally means grove or garden, and the last part is Odu. So they started strolling through the grove of Odu, as it's known, which is also a pseudonym for the name of the room of initiation for a 𝗃𝗍𝗃𝗃. So when they started talking and dating and whatnot, Orumila realized this was the lady for him. He was infatuated with her, And he formally proposed to her and said, I'd like to make you my wife, And she was with it because she recognized he was a decent man, a good man, stable guy, and he had good concepts. Because she had this intuition where she can kind of feel, the heart of the person she was speaking to. She had a gift. And, the only condition she had is that she wanted her own house on the compound. She never wanted to interact with another woman, any of his other wives whatsoever. She just wanted to be her, him, and whichever children they were able to create together. So 𝗀𝗲𝗟 was like, oh man, that's going to be a tough swing, they're going to feel a type of way. And 𝗀𝗲𝗹 didn't budge. And, he realized that she was worthy and, worth all of that was going to come with that. So he built her a home. And, the other wives felt a type of way, of course. It was a little spicy. And one day 𝗀𝗲𝗟 had to go on a trip and he told his other wives, hey, 𝗀𝗲𝗟's in there. You have no reason to go near that room. You have no reason to penetrate that room. She has all of the resources she needs. I'll be back in 16 days, right? 7 days, however you want to look at the symbolism. And one of the wives, I guess number 15, or maybe the head wife, I don't know, she couldn't resist, confronting 𝗀𝗲𝗟 and saying, how dare she, and all these different things. And there's two versions, right? The 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗲𝗃 says that she kicked down the door. The 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗃 says she left an offering at the door. And these are really key points for what I'm going to say afterwards. But when she did this, 𝗀𝗲𝗟 obliterated her. She killed her. So when 𝗀𝗲𝗟 came back, he saw the other wives cowering in a corner, and he looked towards the door of 𝗀𝗲𝗟's home, and the door was open. He found the dead wife, and when he walked in, he said, what happened? And she said, I told you never to allow a woman in this room or on my doorstep, ever. And he said, it'll never happen again as long as I'm around. I won't abandon you ever again. And at that point, they started, they kind of eloped. And they say that 𝗀𝗲𝗟 birthed 256 sons to 𝗀𝗲𝗟, right? And at that point, she became exhausted and said, I don't want any more kids. And, he said, yeah, right, after 256, God help her. And, that was pretty much it. And from that day forward, only 𝗀𝗲𝗟 and his sons entered in to see the sacred mother, or the womb that was 𝗀𝗲𝗟. That's why if you look at the 𝗃𝗟𝗋 𝗃𝗏 concept, and 𝗃𝗟𝗋 𝗃𝗏 has been spoken about in Cuba for, I don't know, since 𝘃𝗶𝗱𝗲𝗃 was around. It's not a new concept to us, but based on the information we always had in 𝗵𝗏𝗏 𝗪𝒃, and especially the new information that came over in the 80s when all those brothers started coming over, it's a really radical thing right now. And for all the people that are watching or listening, nothing but respect. I interact with the 𝗃𝗋𝗋 𝗃𝗏s all the time, 𝗵𝗏𝗏𝗍𝗏. We all have our own concepts and our own literature. But based on the information that we had and that was given to us, it's completely taboo for a woman to cross that curtain or to even give offerings at that door, based on the way the story kind of played out. Because a lot of people say, well, the 𝗃𝗋𝗋 𝗃𝗏 doesn't see 𝗀𝗲𝗟, she doesn't go in the room, offerings are made to 𝗀𝗲𝗟 on her behalf. But if you read and you look at 𝗵𝗏𝗏 𝗪𝒃, the woman couldn't even leave an offering of a plate of food at the door. So women have nothing to do with that door. I even remember one time, we were at an Ifa, and there was an older brother there, 30, 40 years, something like that. And one of the 𝗵𝗶𝗍𝗃s actually knocked on the door, not to go in or anything like that, but to let the alawo, or the new initiate, know there was food at the door. And, he pulled her to the side, very discreet guy, and he explained to her all the information I'm explaining to everybody now, and she never went near that door again, So that's the reason why women cannot, see 𝗀𝗲𝗟 whatsoever. She'll kill them. She wants nothing to do with another woman. And another thing is, I'm not sure where the modifications with this position came from, because I was always under the impression that the 𝗃𝗋𝗋 𝗃𝗏 was the wife of a babalawo who was given, semi-legitimate rights to throw 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗲𝗍 to be able to sustain herself in the babalawo's absence. But if we really look at the, real world interpretation of this right now, when is a babalawo ever missing from a spiritual situation? I mean, you can't go one block in Cuba, anywhere in Cuba, without a babalawo being there. You can't go a block in Miami or New York without a babalawo being there. Africa, forget about it. More than likely that woman's sons are babalawos. There's really no reason for this, and we had pataki about this. Like the 𝗀𝗲𝗟 Irosondí and 𝗃𝗏𝗍𝗏 speaks of when 𝗃𝗃 picked up the chain to throw it when 𝗀𝗃𝗟 left. And when he got back, it led to divorce and all these other things. So The 𝗃𝗍𝗃, I always understood based on, maybe a little older interpretation, was a facilitator and a nurturer, kind of like the 𝗃𝗶𝗸𝗍 is. And it goes even further because when a Babalawo is manifesting a consultation, whether it be via Iking or Opele, he's viewing Odu because he's seeing it in its natural state. The woman never views Odu from the other side of the consultation because the Odu is upside down. So if we interpret Odu didn't want the woman laying eyes upon her, then the woman can't manifest a consultation either. So, it was pretty confusing for us because my elders were pretty open minded guys to a certain degree as far as information. And when we started seeing all the different people who were like, yeah, I did a 𝗃𝗍𝗃, we initiated a 𝗃𝗍𝗃, she pulled her own sign, all these different things, we were completely flabbergasted. And then to actually see, that manifestation in Cuba right now where they have a all 𝗃𝗍𝗃 pulling an Odu for the year and all these different things, we were completely appalled, and obviously opposed, because it was just something that, based on literature and tradition made no sense. Where, from what I understand, the majority of the clans in Nigeria don't even propagate this concept. So we were confused, but, with time, certain people take different interpretations, and then you might have a misinterpretation of what feminism is. It can be seen as oppressive, like, men do this and, women can't do that. But the only reason a man is allowed to or has to become a babalawo is because we're trying to clean up all this spiritual debt from all the horrible things we probably did in a past life, where women are divine and they are the creators. They have no reason to view Odu because they don't realize that the concept of Odu and the Iamio Shoronga are within them. A woman to interact with a woman on that level is seen as completely taboo spiritually. So, all these different concepts are what substantiate us. With respect is always the best way to move forward. So I'm not here to necessarily debate with anyone because I don't think my viewpoint is going to change anybody else's viewpoint or vice versa. But we always, fundamentalize ourselves and stand upon the literature that was given to us by them and by our ancestors, which are ultimately one and the same, which would make sense because it says the same thing.
So, how are male and female relationships, marriage, dating supposed to look in Ifa? Polygamy, is that the norm in practice? Why and why not? And what about the age? What age is acceptable to marry in Ifa?
When you talk about something like love or romance, I don't think spirituality should over influence that interaction. A healthy romantic interaction is natural, it's euphoric. When I was first dating my wife, even though we met because of the religion, regards to the spirit of my father-in-law who passed away, I actually met her at his funeral rites, his 𝗃𝗍𝗃𝗃. We didn't really allow spirituality to over influence that. I mean, I was about allow, she has Oshun done forever. And we kind of just went with the flow. I mean, spirituality didn't necessarily come up because we wanted it to be a natural interaction. We had been friends for a while before we took that step. And, as far as polygamy, the worst thing that could be done is trying to parlay a spiritual position into anything that could provide any romantic benefit that is unethical, in my opinion. You hear some brothers, unfortunately, whether it's Babalawo or Orisha brothers. No, the Orishas had multiple wives. 𝗃𝗍𝗃, had a bunch of women. Shango had a bunch of women. And, they use this as an excuse to be unfaithful or unethical. And there's nothing more atrocious than that because all it does is sully our position and our prestige within our community. 𝗃𝗍𝗃 did have multiple women, but he was married to all of them. And he got permission from the first wife to have the second, the third, fourth, the fifth, 15th, the 16th. Whatever adults want to do to be able to express themselves or create that tribe and help raise healthy children, there's no reason to judge. Me personally, I'm somebody that likes to focus. And I just, I love my wife entirely, and I really wouldn't, personally want her to share that throne with anybody. Other people have different concepts. But all of it's to be respected as long as it's done in a healthy, ethical, and sound fashion. But polygamy is accepted as long as it's done correctly. Are you able to provide for all these women, brother? Are you able to provide for all of your children independently? Like, are you able to each give them a home? Are you each able to stimulate all of them? I don't know. That's a lot. I can't even handle the 4 pets that I have at home apart from these 5 kids. So I don't know what's going through people's minds, but if they're able to swing it and do it in a healthy fashion, an elegant fashion, I mean, 𝗀𝗲𝗍𝗯 never had an issue with his sons having multiple wives, but that's not multiple wives and multiple girlfriends and all this other nonsense. We take no parts in that. So I would say that.
Should a 𝗀𝗲𝗹𝗁 date outside of the priesthood? Same with 𝗵𝗲𝗹. Like, say if you're because it seems to be that even when you get married, you somehow bring your wife into that because of the that role of that 𝗃𝗍𝗑 that works with the 𝗵𝗲𝗹.
Hmm.
I'm not sure if something similar for 𝗀𝗲𝗍𝗁. Say I'm with I start dating a Christian. I mean, is it better? Would you say that it probably would be more better to date within the religion in the priesthood, or is that acceptable to date other religions?
It's acceptable to date other religions. It's much more streamlined if your partner practices the same thing. Because, one of the things that causes divorce, 25% of divorces from what I read, was disputes over spirituality and what we're going to impart upon our children. So, one of the most gratifying moments was, when I gave my daughter hand of Ifa. And even more gratifying was the support that my wife gave me, and just knowing that I could do whatever I want spiritually for my daughter and never have to worry about someone feeling ethically opposed. It's not a taboo by any means, because 𝗀𝗲𝗍𝗯, he practiced different spiritualities, he married into different spiritualities, but it can become complicated. It can become very heated and visceral if we have different viewpoints. But the majority of the time, that's why you see couples having the same spirituality. It's a huge level of compatibility because spirituality is a part of our organism. So it's not taboo, but I don't know how people make that work, especially with the 𝗵𝗲𝗹 thing, because it's late hours. I'm out a lot sometimes. I come home bloodstained, smelling like God knows what. It takes a special type of woman to fulfill that role and have the self-confidence to know that her husband's completely focused on her and providing for her family. So, I don't know how I could explain this to a Christian woman or a Muslim woman or a Buddhist, or, my job and my priesthood and my practice is a little complicated. So, I personally always recommend that you find someone within the practice. Sometimes it's more difficult because it kind of narrows the playing field, not because we don't have a lot of practitioners, but a lot of practitioners aren't out about their involvement in Ifa, so it can be a little more tedious, but the most satisfying, fulfilling relationship I've ever had has been with my wife. So, that's what I recommend. But it doesn't mean you're going to fail if that's not the case, because I have met people, but from a cultural standpoint, it was understood. For example, like, I knew guys that had mano orula in Cuba and their wives weren't uber spiritual, but at the same time, they accepted it because we're all Cuban and we know this comes to a certain degree with our heritage. But like, for example, brothers over here, 𝗵𝗲𝗹, meet somebody completely different cultural background. Hey, I'm a priest of a West African spirituality. You're in the church. You've never heard of this. I don't believe in what you. I don't know to what level or extent that's going to be able to flow, but some people make it work.
So so we're gonna kind of get into another subject that's kind of, it might be a little bit controversial, but Olokun is a Orisha, male
Yeah.
versus or female. I'm not sure, both. Yeah, I'm not sure Olokun. I've heard so many stories, you know. Uh, I want to get into like that whole hermaphroditic transgenderism. So now we're having a lot more of that kind of coming out. You having more women getting surgery, becoming men, men getting surgery, becoming women. What is there any Odu that speaks on transgender sexual reassignment? Um, how are, say, male to female transgenders treated in EFI? And if they get sexual assignment, could a transgender ever become a pet to be?
Thank you for that question. Transgenderism, any of the trans categories, was identified in the Odu of Odi or Odi Atakofiyang or Atakofenyo, Atawo, within Ifa, within the Afro-Cuban Ifa, hundreds of years ago. I'm not sure what I am, when we look, let's start with the 𝘃𝗂𝗃𝗃 context real quick before we get into the pataquí that has to do with 𝗃𝗲𝗃𝗃. The hermaphroditic quality was obviously identified with 𝗃𝗏𝗃, and it's like you said, we're never really going to know what 𝗃𝗏𝗃 is. The 𝗃𝗲𝗃𝗃𝗃 Ogunda says we'll never fully know what's going on below that waist. But, it's not to be disrespected. It's not to be undermined. I know when obi divination is performed in 𝘃𝗂𝗃, the hermaphroditic fifth lobe, if it's present, is either put in front of 𝗃𝗏𝗃, as a symbolism, or discarded, simply because it's not convenient for divination, because there's no way to really interpret it if that comes face up. It is not viewed as a characteristic that is compatible with Ifa priesthood, from what I understand. As far as the trans category as well, I believe it's also not compatible with those brothers over there. But when we base ourselves in the Afro-Cuban tradition, in the 𝗃𝗲𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃, basically what happened is, at least in this story, it speaks of Oshun and Erinle having a son named Lukumi, where in Africa, this gentleman is seen as a fierce warrior. But in this incarnation, within this Odu, he was seen as a young boy who was very fair as far as aesthetics. And he grew good looking, healthy, well-mannered. He was raised well by his parents. And he went for his hand of Ifa with his Oluo, and the 𝗃𝗲𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃 was revealed, where Ifa told him not to initiate him. That's not saying that everybody with 𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃 and the Mano Orula can't do Ifa, because not everybody fulfills, the qualities or characteristics of this person in this story. But the Babalawo, not listening to Ifa, trusting his own judgment more, did Ifa to Lukumi. And within Ifa, he came with the same Odu, 𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃. And basically, 𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃 or Lukumi had a secret that no one knew about. Possibly his parents knew. I don't know. Maybe they didn't want to go through, the scandal or the misinterpretation or misunderstanding. But he would turn into a woman for 6 months and then turn back into a man and go, half of the year with either gender. So when he knew that, the time was coming for him to, metamorph into a woman, he would leave the village for 6 months and go live somewhere else where they identified him as a woman. So he went to that village. And one day, his Oluo, or his godfather, was going to go on a pilgrimage to the other clans and kind of do a round. And he arrived at that village. And it was custom that, when a visiting Babalawo would come to, a village, he was offered the most beautiful woman. And the most beautiful woman there was actually his godson, who he had no idea, So he was led into a hut. The woman was there, his godson as a woman. And they fornicated, right? But ironically, at that moment, the 6 months was coming up, and he woke up next to him as a man. So they kind of looked at each other like, oh my God, what's occurred? Lukumi explained what happened, and, they went through the greatest shame when they left the hut together. And that's why in that Odu was identified that, we do not initiate any of the trans categories as Babalawo, right? Because on one behalf, if you were born biologically as a man and you transition into a woman, it's not because you want to fulfill any roles that are associated with masculinity, ideally, because you've changed the gender to identify with your inner gender, right? However that's termed. And if you're born a woman, you don't have the spiritual DNA or chromosome to go through Ifa initiation anyway, from a priesthood standpoint. So when it comes to the hand of Ifa, me personally, within my establishment, we go by the chromosomes and spiritual DNA that you were given at birth, right? So if someone was born as a biological woman and they've transitioned, perfectly fine. But the process that we're going to take you through is the feminine process, because your iking, your things that you're receiving, is going to respond to your biological makeup, which is no debate there. So as far as the men that, transition into women, same thing. You can receive hand of Ifa, but based on 𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃, you cannot become Babalawo. As far as how people dress and things like that, if you've taken the steps and you've invested the money to be your true self, kudos to you, and that's strength. But at that point, as far as how you choose to express yourself, from a fashion standpoint or aesthetically, we really don't interrupt that. I'm not gonna have somebody who has taken all this efforts to identify as a woman, wear pants during ceremony. I wouldn't do that. I just feel like that's undermining to a certain degree. Because at the end of the day, if we look at the initiatory clothes in Africa, everybody's wearing a white blanket anyway, so there's no gender there. So there's no reason to undermine people, especially when they've worked so hard and gone through so much hardship and obstacles to be able to be their true selves as they view it. So that's Ifa's interpretation of this based on scripture and my personal opinion and practice.
Okay, and so to be clear, so a transgender male cannot become a 𝗵𝗸𝗶, and a transgender female cannot become a 𝗵𝗸𝗹𝗁.
Absolutely not. It's completely based on how you were born.
Okay. So let's get into a little bit more deeper. How does Ifa deal with sexual abuse, trauma? How does the community deal with people that are deviant in sexuality based in Ifa teachings? How does the community deal with child molestation?
Very, very strong theme there. Um, Ifa views people who partake in this as beneath animals. Anyone who expresses themselves this way or delves into that behavior, Ifa does not recognize them as human. When we look at the 𝗀𝗶𝗸𝗲𝗃, it was where the wolf left his children in the care of his brother, the hyena. And the hyena was a glutton, and he was somebody that would eat without measure. He had no control whatsoever. And he was mischievous, and he was somebody that was treacherous, But his brother, out of fraternal love, would ignore his shortcomings to the point where he trusted him with his children. Um, the hyena couldn't resist the temptation of taking advantage of somebody that was helpless, and he devoured his children, his brother's children, or his nieces and nephews, and buried the bones in the backyard. When the wolf came back, the hyena said that his children had ran away, and he had no idea what was going on. And the wolf had this inkling that something was up. He went to visit 𝗀𝗲𝗍𝗁. The 𝗀𝗲𝗶𝗍𝗶 𝗀𝗲𝗍𝗁 was revealed, where Ifa said he needed to make sacrifices to the earth to be able to take the curse off. And when he opened the hole, he found the remains of the hyena. Not the hyena, his children. And when he looked at the hyena, they attacked him and they devoured him and they ripped him to shreds. And that's why till this day the hyena eats the bones to not leave any tracks behind. But Ifa says that anyone who hurts children awaits the same fate. So there's no place for you here.